I'll stay here then. But I don't, oh, is the microphone on? Yes. Magdalena, can you hear me? Okay. I'll start. Hello everybody, my name's Hendrik Ike. I work for GÉANT, which is the European e-infrastructure for national research and education networks. In this BigStage intervention, I'm going to quickly go through what GÉANT is, what the role of NRENs are, and also how we're interacting with the SDGs. So, for a brief overview of GÉANT and our purpose, we have a simple aim, and that's to support collaboration and the development among researchers and disseminate information and provide access to a portfolio of services and infrastructure resources. Now, I'll go into it in a second, but in general, GÉANT and NRENs, we are the public research and education networks which interconnect research institutions and their users within countries, throughout Europe, and also throughout the globe. But it's just not the simple internet connectivity itself, it's also the services we have on top of that. And also on top of that, there's the human interaction. So we have our community program with our task forces and special interest groups, where members of our community can get together and talk about how research and education tools can be developed. But to put it very simply, GÉANT is a membership association. You'll see a lot of acronyms here. You've got JISC on the far right, you've got ARCONET on the far left, you've got NordGÉANT bottom right there. That's a separate type of representative entity. But what all of these names here represent, they represent one European country, and in each European country, you have a national research and education network. So to put that on a map where things are a bit easier to see, you'll see here first and foremost that GÉANT is a non-political entity. So we're geographically European, but we're not limited to the EU 27. Our membership spreads across Europe, and who's within our membership is purely at the decision of our GÉANT General Assembly. But as you can see, together we support, if we consider the links that NRENs have to the end institutions, be that universities or research labs or other educational institutions, across Europe, 10,000 institutions and a global reach, well, within Europe only 50 million academic users. So I'll get into the analogy in a second as to how an NREN and GÉANT works. But if you clump the NRENs together and you see GÉANT as one image, we are the blue European symbol on the left, and the point of this slide is that all over the world there are different regional networks, and they're made up of their own NRENs, and there's a federation of interconnectivity, be that with the pure connectivity of data itself or the services on top of that. And so here, for example, is one collaborative project we have with the European Commission from GÉANT. This is the EAP Connect project, and this shows a development of lines that has been co-funded by the European Commission, and it goes into the regions beyond the EU 27, but is still very much live and running, and I'm very happy to report that considering current geopolitical circumstances. So there's an eastern part of just beyond the GÉANT network, but we also have the north, and this is the NordGÉANT network, the next generation NordGÉANT network. And this is our representative member within GÉANT, and I think it's very important to note NordGÉANT because it is one of the most innovative representative members we have. They actually host connectivity, you can see on the map, but all the way up to Svalbard, which is close to the North Pole. And we were talking about digital sovereignty earlier, and one of the fundamental aspects of that, at least in the European Commission's eyes, are the data gateways declarations, and especially when we're concerning the Polar Data Gateway and the new links to be found towards Asia, and also the way that NordGÉANT can help access, can give users access to the research infrastructures within its own region, such as Lumi in Finland, high-performance computing. This is going to be a very important part of, in what I think of as Europe's digital sovereignty going forward. So this is the NordGÉANT section of the entire GÉANT network. It's a federation of members, representative members, and it's an umbrella. And here's the total umbrella. So here's GÉANT as one. And to give a very quick overview, if you're thinking technically how GÉANT works, I'll give a very simple answer. You have a researcher in Madrid who wants to share research information with a researcher in, what's another Spanish city, let's say Santander. And what they need to do is they need to share their data from one university to another. So what do? They use their National Research and Education Network. And so they will use that network, which is called REDIRIS. However, that researcher might want to share their research data with a fellow collaborator in France, for example. Maybe they want to send that information to Paris. And in order to do that, they need to get that information across Europe. And so that's where GÉANT steps in. So GÉANT is essentially the NREN of the NRENs, if you think of it in terms of an umbrella. So if that researcher wants to send research from Madrid to Paris, then they will use the local NREN, REDIRIS. It will use the GÉANT transnational link. It will then go back down to the National Research and Education Network in France called RENOTER. And then that researcher in Paris should receive that information. Well, they do receive that information. We're a highly successful network. We've been co-funded by the European Commission for over 20 years. And it's a fantastic organization. So if you have any questions about GÉANT or NRENs, please come find me at the end. But the purpose of this talk is to talk about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, because as we're evolving as a community, we're finding that it's not just cables and access services anymore that make us relevant to policymakers. It's also the science and the research and the education that we enable. And at the moment, we're really trying to map how NRENs and GÉANT contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, because this is really important for the future, for the future of the planet, and also for future policy engagement with institutions in Brussels and also at higher levels such as the United Nations or other regional bodies. So here's a brief overview. The European Commission, if you look on the left, here are their 6 political priorities, and then they've been mapping them to the SDGs. If I was thinking from an NREN/GÉANT perspective, I would think we fit most in the 3rd level, that's Europe Fit for the Digital Age. That's where you have number 4, quality education, and you also have number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. But if you think about what science and research does and how these researchers can collaborate with these networks, and actually we enable and help far more of these goals. So I'll use a brief case study. So here we have the European Green Deal, and its ambition is very simple. They want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030, according to 1990 levels. And the grander ambition is to have Europe to be the first climate neutral continent by 2050. So this is going to be enabled by lots of different forms of regulation and legislation, well, regulation and directives. But what's going to help the Green Deal? It's going to be in a variety of thematic areas, and one of them is digital. And so we have something called the twin transitions. And what the European Commission wants to do, essentially, is to model the Earth with real-time AI data. And by doing that, it can measure contemporary weather events, and it can predict future ones. So this is where you say, okay, we're talking about climate change, but where do NRENs and GÉANT help? Well, this is where we help, because we can provide the highways for which the data needs to get from any research infrastructure to computing centers to make these models. And then eventually that information is fed back to policymakers. So it's one long chain, and this is where GÉANT and NRENs play their part. The European data strategy, this is very much tied into it. We've been hearing earlier about how digital sovereignty is starting to become a larger issue in Europe. It essentially has one aim, and that's to create a single European marketplace for data. If you can think of it in the most simple of terms, it would be a Schengen area for data. However, it's a very, very complicated setup. And my colleague Catherine Sturver asked this question a few weeks ago: what is data altruism? And that's the question I wish many people think about when we think about common data spaces, because it depends who you ask. A researcher is going to have a very different definition of data altruism to someone who works in the private sector. So what should be given away? What should be purchased? Should it be transactional at all? Should it be based around trust? The way the common data spaces are going to be coming across in the future, I'm going to slowly start listing them up here on the screen. This is all part of the European Commission's dream of having a data lake with these 9 common data spaces, pooling data where it can. Just as I mentioned, by the way, when I say the digital twin, the digital transformation of the model planet of the Earth, that's going to be in that second blob down there, the Green Deal data space, now renamed Destination Earth. So tying all this together, in short, there's lots of policies, there's lots of different institutions making policies, and it's very hard to sometimes understand how to measure where we are as a community when we're just trying to say, hey, we're doing better for the Earth. But we still have some case studies. So for GÉANT and NRENs, we have our flagship trust and identity services. Many of you in this room might be using EduRoam, for example. That's a technology originally created within our community and has grown by itself because we're a collaborative community. And as such, we have EduRoam users using common credentials across institutions in Europe and beyond. But it's not just technology. We also have a community based around education, and we have a task force where practitioners of educational tools and services actually meet on a common basis and discuss what the NREN community can do more for people in education. SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. This is our bread and butter, I think, as we already covered. We interconnect both within member states, outside of member states, and beyond regions globally, be it ourselves, our partners, Nordinet, GÉANT. These interconnections are there, and they've been there for a long time, and they're based on trust and reciprocity. And we're really seeing that as these initiatives that the European Commission has thought of in the future, such as EuroHPC, Quantum, these infrastructures really are going to be at the center of sharing this information both within Europe and globally when the time comes. Partnerships, SDG 17. GÉANT and its predecessors have been around for actually quite a long time, and it's always been driven by an opt-in, consensus-based approach. Reciprocity, trust, we have our members decide what we should do as a common voice, as a common steer. And this is a really good way to set up a long-lasting partnership with any institution. So I think when we go to the UN or we go to the Commission and they're asking how should we set up a body, I think GÉANT and its predecessors, which has been around since the 80s, really stand as a good force for good in explaining how partnerships can work. And the final SDG I'll go into as a case study is gender equality. This is something that is becoming more and more important from, well, it's quite arbitrary to say it's becoming more important when you say it's within Horizon Europe and you need to have a gender equality plan. I think it's an arbitrary start to a process which needs to be sustained. But we nonetheless are increasing the number of women in STEM campaigns we host, and also trying to increase the number of women and our recruitment into GÉANT. I can only speak here of GÉANT, the association I work for, but I know that similar efforts are happening across the NREN community. But this isn't really good enough, and I don't mean just for gender equality, but also how we measure the SDGs, because what I'm really doing here is almost greenwashing. I'm essentially putting a flag, putting an SDG next to case studies of what we do. And what we want to do in the future is to be a bit more ambitious when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals. And with that, I'll use a case study. So I said the network is our bread and butter earlier, and one thing we're currently trying to do is estimate, really, it sounds really simple, but how much energy our network uses in total. And actually, some of the different machines, some of the different routers, some of them actually, you have live energy measurements, some have monthly reporting, others even require an engineer to go to the site where the POP or point of presence is, to figure out how much energy that router uses. And as a result, we're at the very, very early start of the process of, we don't have the KPI to even say how much energy we use, let alone what we can do to reduce energy apart from invest in more efficient equipment, which we have done with our new project GM43N, but it's still a complex task. And the whole thing when it comes to the SDGs, I've realized, is not listing case studies like I did earlier, but we're trying to make things measurable, and we have the tools to do that. So beneath every SDG, there are several targets, and these targets are considered achieved if the indicators fall below them are fulfilled. And there's actually 231 unique indicators beneath each target. And what we're going to start doing at GÉANT is going through each goal and seeing where we have any actions which are applicable to us, and therefore see if we have any indicators that we can use to fill in and actually go a bit further in explaining how we contribute to the SDGs. And we're going to do it like this. This is my penultimate slide, but it's probably the most important one. If any organization wants to see how they can contribute to the SDG and actually make it measurable, so institutions can read back on what if say the European Commission is funding GÉANT to do something, but they say, hey, there's a requirement that you fulfill the SDGs in these areas, this is the way you do it. You identify the goal, you identify the target that's applicable to you, and then you start going into the indicators. And so here we have an example for SDG 9, and 9 is and the target within this one is to facilitate sustainable and resilient infrastructure in African countries. And we do that as one of our projects with our African partners called Africa Connect 3, which the European Commission puts money into. And we actually have indicators. So there are things we can prove both with financial evidence and examples where we can fulfill these indicators, and we can feed this information back, and we can actually start showing how our community as a whole starts to contribute to the SDGs. And that's the work we're actually going to do at the start of the next form of the GÉANT project, GÉANT 5.1, which begins at the beginning of 2023. And it's work that I'll be leading on, and I'm really, really excited to do with my colleagues throughout the NRENs. My final image before I leave, this was the last time our community got together, apart from we had our first global conference, TNC 22, last week in Trieste. So there are a few more people there, but this is the community I'm a part of, GÉANT, NRENs, and representative research and education networks. We're all together, and we're trying to make the future a better place, slowly, step by step, but I'm very proud to be a part of it. So that concludes my talk, and thank you very much. Any questions, or forever hold your peace? No? Thank you. I'm being pointed back, yeah. Hello?
Yeah, no, it's switched on. No worries.
I'm slightly deaf, so if you could speak up a bit, that would help. I'm serious.
It's not me, it's the microphone we need to speak up. But can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. Very useful. I wanted to ask you two questions. To be sure, who is in France your member? I guess it's Renater, but I just want to have confirmation.
Renater is our French NREN, yeah.
And you have other in France, or it's the only one?
Only one.
Okay. And the second, it's how you connect with other European organizations like, I will say, RIPE NCC, Center, in the arena of internet, I would say. And my last point, it's not really a question, is that as I am chair of the EuroLaw, who is an end-user perspective within ICANN, I think it could be interesting to have some exchange with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think I answered your first question, Renate. Yep, that is our French member. So for other parts of the internet, there's yes and no's for GÉANT in our community because we're slowly getting involved in the data level. Of course, we know people in RIPE and CC. If we're going to talk about a traditional research infrastructure like CERN, then yes, we service them. But when we're talking about internet standards, our community and GÉANT, we have social interactions, but the way we interact is not as concrete as the way I just described to you with that infrastructural map. And regarding ICANN and Internet Governance Associations, ISOC as well, GÉANT is slowly getting more and more involved in trying to be at those discussions. Also at the IGF, we presented last year on the group on Earth observation and how our community can help enable the work they do there. So from an internet governance perspective, we're starting from quite a humble space, but we have a very strong history of people being involved in the internet. But with time, we're hoping to build a stronger voice.
Thank you.
Thank you.